What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, February 25th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 7-game NBA slate tonight. A lot of Q tags that we're still waiting on, so stuff's going to change. Also, this show is going to be a little bit different than usual because we don't have good ownership projections to use because of the Charlotte news coming out right before the show started. So it would be pointless to look at it that way. So I did just figure out how often, roughly, I think players are going to show up in optimal lineups, and we can take a look at that as we go through game by game. I'm going to try and get through this one pretty quickly because I do still have a couple of teams that I need to finish up my projections on. So going to go game by game, though, as usual. Chokehold'em in chat said, can you tell me why I have the Sharks in my $1 tournaments? Did DK change the rules? I thought it had to be $4 and up. I don't know who you're referring to, but it also depends on the size of the prize pool. Although I think that $1 tournaments, it doesn't matter. I don't know the last time that I saw a $1 tournament in the lobby. But in like $3 and $4 tournaments, if the prize pool is big enough, I know I can play. But yeah, I mean, I don't know who you're referring to. It's a pretty good chance that they just haven't played as much money as you think they have. And there were some people that got like re-access to those. I don't remember what the criteria was, but I remember being kind of jealous of that. So yeah, I don't know is the answer. But gonna go game by game as always. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up on the video. That stuff helps out quite a bit. Also, if you do want access to my projections, you can get those using the link in the description below. 3-day free trial on that gets you access to a spreadsheet that updates as I update my projections. So updates in real time for you, giving you projected minutes, projected fantasy points for DraftKings and FanDuel, projected starting lineup, live projections for DraftKings once the slate starts. So check that out as well. Eric said, what's up? Do you use direct fill or autofill after the sim? What difference does it make when playing multiple contests? I'm not sure off the top of my head. Like, I just do whatever works for me. I don't remember what the differences are. There's a bunch of videos on the SaberSim site for what everything does. Yeah, I don't remember what does what. I just know what I have to click to get it to do what I want it to do. Starting with the Celtics taking on the Raptors. Q tag on Al Horford. Drew Holiday is out. Horford, I assume, is going to be in the starting lineup if he plays. If he doesn't, I assume he will be replaced by Sam Hauser, who would then get a pretty substantial bump in playing time. Right now, I only have Hauser projected for like 20 minutes or so. So I would expect mid to upper 20s from Hauser if Horford is out. If Horford is in, he's going to look like a pretty good value at 4,200. Have him projected for 29 minutes. He's averaged around 30 minutes per game as a starter this year. They are 11-point favorites here at Toronto, but if this game were to go down to the wire, he probably plays more than 29 minutes. So that is news that we'll have to keep an eye on. Also, if Horford is out, it solidifies Peyton Pritchard's minutes even more. One way or the other, Pritchard's going to look good, though. $5,200, averages around 30 minutes per game when any of the starters are out. He most likely will come off the bench, but he is live to close the game. He also gets garbage time typically, so it kind of makes him blowout proof or even, benefits from blowouts at times. So one way or the other, with or without Horford, Pritchard's going to look good at 5,200, but I do think that he'll look a little bit better if Horford's out, just because it gives him even more minutes to play. So those two up here at the top, looking like pretty good values. Celtics on the front end of a back-to-back, like Steven said, yeah, decent chance that Horford sits, but it is the first game of the night, so no real reason to care at this point. Just know how to adjust if he does sit. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Porzingis, I think all secondary options here, pretty much correctly priced. Like Drew Holiday being out gives you a little bit of a minutes bump for Brown and Tatum, but it doesn't do a whole lot because Drew Holiday is not your primary scorer. He's not your primary playmaker. He's out there just kind of filling in the gaps, playing defense, doing a lot of things that don't, his absence doesn't lead to increased production for anybody else. So it doesn't move the needle the same way that, like, if Jaylen Brown is out, Jason Tatum looks better, or if Jason Tatum's out, everybody looks better. Drew Holiday doesn't have that effect. So if you are going to Brown, you are going to Tatum, it's because you do expect them to play at least a little bit more. And if Horford's out, probably a lot more. And also, pretty solid matchup here against the Raptors. Porzingis, I think, looks pretty decent at 7,500 as well. I was a little bit higher on his projection, at least earlier in the day, than sites that I looked at. I think he's somebody that just kind of falls through the cracks sometimes, where because he's had a couple of games this year where he got injured in the first half, and there have been a couple of games where he was on a minutes restriction. If you're just using an algorithm to project minutes and it's mostly derived from average playing time throughout the season, it's going to just give you a number that's a little bit lower than what you should actually expect from Porzingis. So I do think he looks pretty good, but also you can see here, again, take the ownership projections with a grain of salt because they haven't updated for Charlotte. But you can see here that I think Porzingis's ownership is pretty close, or Porzingis's optimal percentage is pretty close to his ownership. So expecting low 30s in minutes from him. Looks fine at 7,500, but obviously there is a lot of opportunity cost at center. Keta at 3K flat, I expect to be the backup center here. Luke Kornet is out, and that does matter. Keta probably gets those minutes. There is some chance, I guess, that it's Xavier Tillman, but from what we've seen typically, as throughout the season and recently from Boston, my expectation is that Keta is the next guy up. And at 3K flat on a slate that right now doesn't have a ton of good value, I don't mind getting there, but obviously keep your expectations in check as well. As you can see, only have about a 15 fantasy point projection on him. So this isn't a Zach Collins type play from last night where, you're expecting a good raw score from him. This is more of a, it opens other things up in your lineup, but the risk to plays like that, especially at center, are that the opportunity cost at the position, is typically high. So if you play Keta and he goes for, let's say 20 DraftKings points, which obviously is solid production for a 3K price tag, depending on how the slate plays out, there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up boxing yourself out from plays that you actually need. Like if you have two centers that go for 45, 50, 55 DraftKings points, suddenly that 20 you got from Keta or 22 or whatever is completely irrelevant because you'd be better off having 17 or 18 from a small forward and having both of those centers to win a tournament. So there is a big difference in Keta as a 3K value play versus somebody like Zach Collins last night. Derek White looks fine at 6,700. Again, should see increased playing time without Holiday, but not going to see, you don't expect any real bump in production. Assist numbers do go up a little bit for Holiday without or for White without Holiday, but nothing too crazy. Obviously, most of the production for the Celtics with or without Drew Holiday is running through Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Hauser, again, not interested in him if Horford's in. If he's out, though, he will look like a pretty solid value at 3,900. Steven said if Mogbo is the center, you don't have to go big, but they probably would anyway. Like the thing is, they don't really have, they have alternatives, I guess, but like the alternatives are playing non-rotation guys. So there's no real incentive for them not to anyway. Generally, they've just been playing Kornet as the backup center. I expect that you'll get Keta basically taking those Kornet minutes. If you were to cut him out of the rotation here, especially if Horford's out, but even if Horford's in, all you're gaining is now you have one of the end of bench guys in the rotation that doesn't normally play. So I don't really know why they would do it or what benefit they have. On the Toronto side, we do have a Q tag on Jakob Poeltl. If he's back, I assume he's moving into the starting lineup. I assume that he is somewhat limited. I have him in for 28 minutes right now. Maybe we'll get confirmation on that. Maybe we won't. At 28 minutes, it gets him to show up a little bit, but nothing crazy at 6,300. RJ Barrett showing up the most often for me at 10%. Grady Dick, Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley all look pretty solid. Obviously, Quickley coming off the huge game the other day. Still only played 30 minutes in that game. I have him projected for about 31 here. We have seen the playing time ramp up in general, but the matchup against Boston obviously leaves quite a bit to be desired. I don't love Grady Dick either, but he is 4,200. So I think as a relatively low-owned last piece in, perfectly fine. But I wouldn't say there's any priorities from the Raptors. I think it's mostly looking at how ownership looks right now. RJ Barrett, the closest thing to a priority, but still a secondary play. Shooting guard, small forward, obviously is pretty valuable, and he's relatively inexpensive. But I think for the most part, the Raptors kind of serve two purposes here. One, they're giving you good players, good fantasy producers at low ownership, or I assume low ownership. Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, guys like that. But they do also positively correlate with the guys that you probably will be playing from Boston. Like if you're playing Horford, ideally you get a competitive game and you get the maximum Horford minutes. And if this game is competitive, that is good news for RJ Barrett, for Scotty Barnes, etc. Emmanuel quickly. So there is some merit to, the heavier your lineup is on the Celtics, having the main pieces from Toronto. If you look at the correlations for Scotty Barnes here, you can see heavily correlated with RJ Barrett, heavily correlated with Pritchard, with Quickly, with Porzingis, Jason Tatum, positive correlation there. So I actually expected to see it a little bit higher with the Boston guys, since you do expect more playing time from them if, for example, Barnes plays well. But starters are going to positively correlate in a game like this that has a relatively wide spread. So, keep that in mind for your tournaments. Cleveland taking on Orlando, Q-tag on Darius Garland. This is obviously a big one. Haven't seen an update on his shoot-around status. So the other day was very confident he was not going to play. Today, I have him projected in until I hear otherwise. If he does not play, obviously Donovan Mitchell's going to look better. Ty Jerome's going to look better. Strus is going to look better. Okoro probably starts and still looks like shit. Mobley will look better. We got 36 minutes from him last game without Garland. So as a whole, Cleveland will look better if Garland's out. That goes without saying. If Garland is in, another secondary team, relatively difficult matchup against Orlando. Still a very talented team, obviously. So at low ownership, if you want to mix in some Darius Garland, some Donovan Mitchell, some Evan Mobley, some Jared Allen, any of those pieces are perfectly fine, but none of them are going to stand out as top options that you want to get to. It looks like right now Jared Allen is pulling some ownership at 6,200. I think that's okay, but his playing time when this team is fully active isn't exactly appealing. Like, you're usually looking at 28, 29 minutes from him. Obviously getting Evan Mobley backup center minutes. There's no urge to get Allen a bunch of minutes. Like, you're not losing anything when you have Mobley out there. And then you just have this abundance of wings when you have Strus, you have Dean Wade back, you have Okoro back, you have DeAndre Hunter now. You still want to get Ty Jerome some minutes. I assume, are going to keep Sam Merrill in the rotation. So you really don't have a clear path to Jared Allen playing more than 28 to 30 minutes, which obviously isn't ideal, but he does still give you some upside at 6,200. On the Orlando side, clean injury report there as far as Q tags go. Jalen Suggs is still out. It's status quo for Orlando. No Suggs, no Mo Wagner, and then a couple guys in the G League. So we should still get Cole Anthony starting alongside KCP, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. Wendell Carter Jr. showing up the most optimal for me. 5,100 at center just looks good at that price. Should give you upper 20s in minutes here. He is live to play more than 30 occasionally, but generally you're going to get something like a 27 to 30 minute split in favor of Wendell Carter, with Goga Bitadze playing all of the backup center minutes. Last game, obviously Carter didn't play a lot, but that was a game where they blew out the Wizards. He didn't come back in the fourth quarter. So that minutes total is just going to be a little bit misleading. Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, obviously if you get to those guys, fine, but they are expensive, 8,700 and 8,300 against Cleveland. They're just not going to stand out as top plays. They are guys that still have high ceilings. Clearly the offense runs through them. We have seen a couple of games lately where Franz Wagner's gotten up to 38 minutes. We've seen kind of that minutes upside from him a little bit more frequently than Paolo. Not to say Paolo won't occasionally play huge minutes as well. Clearly they both can give you big games, but you're also paying for it. And then Cole Anthony at 5,300 is just basically pure volatility at this point. I was a little bit surprised how the field and industry in general reacted to his playing time. He had, in these games without Jalen Suggs and with the rest of the other starters, he's overall this year averaged 24 minutes per game. We had frequently been seeing him play 3 stints where he starts the first half, closes the first half, starts the third quarter, and then doesn't come back. Then he had back-to-back games where he played mid-30s, and suddenly everybody was pretty comfortable that that's just his new role. And then he plays 20 minutes against Washington. Granted, that game did blow out. Maybe he would have played in the fourth quarter. I kind of doubt it because he was playing like shit. I think he's still just this very volatile player where if he's playing well, he can play his way into a lot of minutes. If he's not, you have Anthony Black behind him playing every minute that he doesn't play. You're just going to get a lot of games where Black plays more minutes than Anthony, but then you're going to get the games mixed in where Anthony not only plays more than 24 minutes, but goes and plays 34, 35. And when he's $5,300, if that happens, you probably need him because not only is he playing huge minutes, but he's probably playing huge minutes as a result of playing well through those first 3 stints that he's basically guaranteed. So he's somebody that when he's popular, I typically just don't really play that much of. And then when he's not popular, I am more interested. Here, getting, showing up as optimal around 8% of the time. One thing, one reminder, you're not trying to build the optimal lineup in NBA. It's not going to happen. You shouldn't try. You'll make really bad lineups trying to do it. So if you do see ownership higher than what is essentially the optimal percentage here, that doesn't mean that they're a bad play or anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's just, giving you a guide that, Anthony basically, I think, is a secondary play, showing up as optimal like 8% of the time. You'll see guys in double digits, that are clear, bigger priorities like Peyton Pritchard was. So I think that this ownership on Anthony is fine. Like the ceiling is certainly there. The floor is just also non-existent, as you saw in his game against Washington the other day. Nothing else really that is particularly interesting. A little bit of Jonathan Isaac, KCP showing up, but nothing that is really worth talking about. San Antonio taking on the Pels in New Orleans. No Charles Bassey tonight, which does set up a pretty interesting rotation potentially for the Spurs. We saw him not play the second half last game. So Bismack Biyombo, 4,300, did get starter minutes for the first time in that last game. He got up to 30 minutes, and I do take note of that and put some faith in it because Bismack Biyombo, it's not like, obviously he hadn't been around this season, but it's not like he just like is some really old dude that we don't have any recent history of him as a starter. He started plenty of games last year. If you go back to the start of last year, he's averaging like mid to upper 20s when he starts. So I think that there's a pretty good chance that you continue to get at least mid-20s in minutes from Biyombo. I have him at about 25 minutes right now. If I got to 26 or 27, I wouldn't hate it. But also, this is a New Orleans team that you don't really have to go that big against them. Like, there's a pretty good chance that Misi's not even in the closing lineup. They have, like, they're big in the front court, but they're not, like, dominant center big, if that makes sense. They don't have, like, the one big dominant scoring center. They just have they're big 3 through 5 when they're playing Zion, Olynyk, and Misi next to each other. But you don't necessarily have to play Biyombo a ton of minutes. You can get away with those Jeremy Sohan, Keldon Johnson, Champagny lineups as well. So I am interested to see how they play this one. But I do think that you're likely getting at least mid-20s, if not more, from Biyombo. He's a decent point per minute guy. He's only 4,300. So I do think he's viable as a value play at what should be relatively low ownership. De'Aaron Fox looks pretty good at 8,700, averaging 35 minutes per game since joining the Spurs. So that is a little bit of a haircut off of what he was playing in Sacramento, but the price tag is affordable here. High team total for the Spurs. Fox looks looks like a pretty good play. I think that Keldon Johnson is very interesting at 5K. For whatever reason, people don't seem to be putting any weight into him getting a minutes bump with Wemby out, even though we've seen that all season long. I have him projected for 25.5 minutes. I have Sohan projected for 25.5 minutes, and you're getting a $1,500 discount on Keldon Johnson. I think there's a pretty decent chance Johnson ends up in the closing lineup, especially if he is playing well. And like I said, it's very easy for the Spurs to go with that if they want to. Now, again, keep in mind, it was the same matchup the other day when Biyombo played 30 minutes, but you still got upper 20s, mid to upper 20s from Keldon in that game as well. Sohan only played like 21. So I do think Keldon Johnson looks kind of interesting. CP3 at 5,800, price tag is pretty good there. 6,100 price tag for Vassell is solid at first look as well. One thing I will point out, though, is that we've seen their playing time trending down a little bit lately. Now, in part, you can chalk that up to they have been in blowouts in their last 2 games, but even the first half rotations haven't been favorable, where Vassell and Chris Paul have just kind of run abbreviated rotations. Vassell didn't start the second half 2 games ago. He's also been really bad in the games that he's played with De'Aaron Fox so far. Vassell's only averaged 0.72 DraftKings points per minute in the 7 games he's played with Fox. So I am concerned about that fit. Obviously at best, it's just growing pains and taking a while for Vassell to adjust. So I do have concerns about his production and his playing time. Again, you're not short on guys that can just soak up minutes, guard/wing minutes for the Spurs when you have Castle, Keldon Johnson, Champagny, and Sohan all available off the bench. So I am concerned about that. And then again, CP3's minutes taking a little bit of a haircut too. That was something that, I expected to see once De'Aaron Fox joined this team. So to me, Chris Paul does look better than Vassell. He is a little bit cheaper. I am a little bit more confident in his role and playing time as well. But did want to mention that we've seen playing time not look quite as good for those guys. Harrison Barnes, seen his playing time take a hit as well. Now he is still in that bucket where if he just goes out there and plays really well, he can play 28 minutes, but not showing up as any sort of priority whatsoever for me. On the other side for the Pels, same injury report as we've been getting from them. No DeJounte Murray, of course, out for the season. No Brandon Boston, no Keon Brooks, no Herb Jones, no DeJounte Murray. Everybody else is good to go. Kelly Olynyk looks like a solid value here. He has power forward eligibility, which is really nice. Most of the value that has been relatively appealing so far has been at center. And so getting to a $4,500 Olynyk at power forward is going to just add some value since the opportunity cost isn't as high. He started the last couple of games, 23 and a half minutes and then 25 minutes. We haven't seen him close. There is some chance that he does, at some point, but not projecting him that way. Still, though, at 24 and a half minutes, he's showing up as optimal about 24% of the time. This is an example of, even if he's 28, 30, 35% owned, anybody that's showing up in the optimal lineup a quarter of the time is kind of just by definition going to be a good play. So I think getting to Olynyk makes a lot of sense. Jose Alvarado, 5,500, has been coming off the bench, but he has been closing. There is always some additional risk when guys come off the bench just because the rotations can tend to be a little bit more volatile, especially if, for example, Olynyk and Misi are playing well or something, then maybe Alvarado loses a little bit of his, closing run. But in general, I think you should be expecting like 29, 30 minutes in that range here from Alvarado. At 5,500, that's going to look solid. Zion at 8,500 looks pretty good as well. One small note on Zion is that if you're using a Sims tool, be careful with how you're projecting him. You can see here I have him at 27 and a half minutes. He's tricky to project because he's very, very consistently playing 28 minutes, but he hasn't played more than 28 minutes in a game since early November. And the nice thing about a Sims tool compared to an optimizer is that it is, it's factoring in range of outcomes, not just your median projection. The thing you have to be careful with, especially if you're using a publicly available sim where you can't see exactly what they're doing on the back end with minutes, is if you say, well, Zion plays, 28 minutes and change every game, so I'm going to project that, unless you know that they are basically giving him just like no standard deviation or no upside standard deviation in his playing time, the sim is going to be saying, oh, well, in this iteration, Zion plays 32 minutes when that is just not happening as far as we know. So, do be careful with that. Again, at the same time, I didn't want to under project him. Like, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to overcompensate and give him a 25-minute projection and then just not play Zion. So I am happy to see that he's showing up at a good clip, but not a really high one. If I were getting him at, like 30% or something, as far as optimal rate, I would probably dial this back to like 27 flat, but that's just something I wanted to point out for people using sims, especially, assuming that if you're watching this show, you're probably not using your own sim that you built and know exactly what's going into it. You just always want to be careful in situations where you have kind of not normal distributions of minutes. There is always going to be downside risk to anybody's minutes, Zion included, can get hurt, can get in foul trouble, game can blow out, and then he's playing, 22, 23, however many minutes to the downside. There's no indication that there's any sort of like volatility to the upside for Zion's minutes. So do keep that in mind. You see that a lot too when guys come back from injury. If a coach says that they're going to be limited to 26 minutes, excluding the situations where the coaches are lying, if you just say 26 minutes as a projection, that's great. But you need to be careful that you're not then assuming sometimes he's playing 30, because that's probably not happening. Misi showing up for me, 4,600. When Zion does play, you do run the risk of Misi not closing. Last couple games, playing time hasn't been there for him, but there was one blowout mixed in there as well. At 4,600, though, have him projected for 26 minutes just makes him look like a pretty solid value. There are still games where he will close, particularly if he's playing well, which when you're talking about cheap players is really, really valuable. Again, when you're thinking about upside in tournaments, having that correlation where if Misi is playing well, he probably is just writing his own ticket to be in the closing lineup. So in the games where, not always, but a relatively high percentage of the games where Misi doesn't close and he only plays 22 or 23 minutes, he probably hadn't been putting up fantasy production that was going to win you a tournament anyway. And then the games where he is putting up fantasy production that has you in contention, again, not always, but it's more likely that he does close and that you get those extra minutes for him. So I think at 4,600, the price tag's fallen far enough that taking on the minutes risk on him is pretty appealing. He is somebody that really ranges from 22 to 30 minutes as potential outcomes here. Trey Murphy, obviously going to play a lot. 8,100, shooting guard, small forward, secondary play. Same with CJ McCollum. McCollum has not been playing a ton of minutes lately. I do want to point that out because the Pels are not playing for anything. And McCollum obviously is, not a huge piece of their future or anything like that. He's, older than Murphy, older than, all of these guys really. So not to say that there's no chance that we get a 36-minute game from him. We got it right before the All-Star break. He played 41, including overtime against Sacramento. But if you look at his rotations in these games since we came back from the break, he's just kind of getting straight to like 30-ish minutes. And it seems to be by design. I still haven't projected for 32 because, again, I don't know that is just what we're doing the rest of the year. I'm not convinced of that yet. But if I were to just project his minutes without factoring that in at all, he would have come out to like 33 and a half. So I did give him a little bit of a haircut here. But, at 7,500 without half the team active, there is still some upside for him. And then nothing else that really looks too important. Bruce Brown is 3,600. He has a path to decent fantasy production playing 18 to 20 minutes, but there's plenty of guys that look like that. Milwaukee taking on Houston. Giannis played 32 minutes last game. They said before the game that they were going to be increasing his minutes limit. I have him projected the way that I normally would now. That got me to a 34-minute projection. I will lower that if we get confirmation he's on a minutes limit, especially if it's like a specific number. But I kind of just am assuming that he's back to being Giannis. He had talked about his minutes restriction and kind of said, he'll do whatever the team needs, but it didn't sound from his comments like he was going to be limited for a super long time. And then you got 32 minutes last game. Power said Pirtle is out. Dick is in. So that should be Orlando Robinson back in the starting lineup. That gives you some more center value. In Toronto's most recent game against Phoenix, Robinson started. He only played 20 minutes. Again, that game wasn't super competitive, but he did not come back in the fourth quarter when Emmanuel Quickley, Grady Dick, RJ Barrett, and Scotty Barnes came back. They had Chris Boucher out there who was playing well. So you are going to have some volatility in minutes where you got 19 and a half minutes exactly from all three of Orlando Robinson, Jonathan Mogbo, and Chris Boucher in that game. But there is also, the potential for Robinson to play more minutes than that. He is on DraftKings coming in at $4,100. So another value option at center that does have a ceiling, but also does have a pretty realistic chance of just putting you in that bucket of, oh shit, I just took 22 fantasy points at center. This lineup is absolutely dead no matter what he cost. So, pay a lot of attention to ownership on guys like that. But he will project as a good point per dollar value, most likely. For Milwaukee, I do think Giannis looks good here. I'm really, really interested in how his ownership looks because you get a really fun spot here where he would already be low owned because he's $500 more than Luka, and he projects slightly worse or as good. But then you also factor in the Luka narrative, which I don't even disagree with. Like, I think Luka probably is going to shoot more than average in this game, but you're just going to get so much ownership going to Luka, and it's going to be tough to play Luka and Giannis together. So it's just going to drive down Giannis's ownership. Again, I don't have good ownership numbers right now, but you can see 4.5% being projected by SaberSim right now. The ownership run I had done before Charlotte had like 35% going to Luka and like 3 or 4% going to Giannis. So I do think that Giannis does create a really interesting situation where, you can love Luka all you want in this spot. I'm right there with you. But And Giannis's matchup sucks, and Giannis might still be limited to some extent. Like there's all of these things working against Giannis, but anytime somebody tells you that you can get a 10-1 ownership discount on Giannis Antetokounmpo and you don't have to pay that much more in salary, he's going to be interesting in top-heavy large field tournaments. There's no real way around it. So I do think that's something to keep in mind at least. Dame is Dame, 9,300. You know the ceiling that you're getting, but Houston obviously is a good defensive team. They're not a fast-paced team. There is a chance that they are back fully at full strength tonight. Fred VanVleet has been practicing. He is questionable. So, not prioritizing Dame, but you're never wrong for just playing low on Dame. Kyle Kuzma's salaries come up to $7K, and now he is playing with Giannis and with Dame, so not going to be super interested in him. I don't really think there's much of interest from the Bucks now that they're back to mostly healthy outside of Bobby Portis. Other than, again, I think Giannis does make for a very interesting tournament play. But again, there are plenty of things working against him relative to Luka. You're just going to get a situation, though, that you just get Giannis at no ownership probably. So if he beats Luka and you have him, you are in very, very good shape, even if he's not super likely to beat Luka. Houston on the other side here, they are a difficult team to project right now because we have not seen what they're going to do with the emerged Amen Thompson, really, really good player, starter, playing huge minutes, and Fred VanVleet back, and Tari Eason fully healthy. My guess at the starting lineup is VanVleet, Green, Brooks, Thompson, and Şengün. There's plenty of iterations it could be. They could bring VanVleet off the bench in his return and keep Eason in the starting lineup. They could go Smith back in the starting lineup and VanVleet off the bench. They could move Thompson back to the bench. I don't know what they're going to do. But the nice thing is that I do think they're going to run a tight enough rotation where no matter what the starting lineup is, there are still some pieces that look at least solid here. Şengün at 8,500, I still think is playing low 30s in minutes. I don't have him projected as highly as I did the other day when Eason was out and VanVleet was out. I will project him a little bit higher if VanVleet ends up being out, but with Eason being back, it does still cut into his playing time. But at 8,500, Şengün is still going to look solid. Jalen Green's still going to have a high ceiling at 7,300. His minutes projection will go up if VanVleet is out, but still probably playing, 33, 34 minutes or so, even if VanVleet is in. I think Thompson is probably still playing mid-30s. It's not very difficult to find minutes for guys, especially if you assume VanVleet is somewhat limited. I projected 30 minutes to VanVleet without hearing anything otherwise. And so I really didn't have trouble getting 36 and a half minutes for Thompson. I still gave a stint to Steven Adams off the bench. I still gave Jae'Sean Tate like 10 minutes off the bench. I gave Eason like 24, 25 minutes. So I didn't have trouble. I gave Jabari still 30, 31 off the bench. So I didn't have trouble finding minutes for guys, even if I gave Thompson a bunch of minutes. I still think you're going to get low 30s in minutes from Dillon Brooks. I think that whether he's starting or not, you're probably getting 30, 31 minutes from Jabari Smith. Tari Eason at 5,600, probably playing mid-20s. So I do think you can be mixing and matching these Houston guys, but it is just, there's a little bit more risk because we don't know exactly how these rotations are going to go. I do feel relatively confident, though, that it will be a tight enough rotation that there is some upside or value, whatever you want to call it here, even with this team getting healthier. Wald said, I don't buy most narratives, but I'd put Luka's shot attempts over under at like 29.5 tonight. Yeah, I don't buy them either. But I do buy them more in basketball than any other sport because you can directly control it for the most part. People talk about like revenge games in baseball, and it's just like, yeah, you don't just magically get better at hitting a baseball. You talk about them in football, but you still have to have the quarterback on the same page throwing you the ball. And the quarterback probably cares a lot more about playing well than about getting you whatever revenge. But here, one, Luka is the highest usage guy on the team anyway. He can just call his number whenever he wants. Two, LeBron strikes me as the kind of guy that will gladly tell Luka to just go get his. And I'm pretty sure Luka wants to do that also. So again, there's no guarantee. But the thing to keep in mind, too, is like DFS is different than betting. And I mean, this is way off topic, I guess, because we're not to that game yet. But DFS is different than betting, too. Like when you talk about prop betting, the line on Luka, at least to some extent, is going to have adjusted. And his points prop is just going to be higher today than it would be other days. in DFS, 10,500 for Luka. I don't care what team he's playing. He's going to be a really, really good play. Then you just factor in, oh, by the way, there's a very good chance that he's just going to go say, fuck you, and shoot every time down the floor and score as many points as he possibly can. So I'm on the same page. I don't generally buy into narratives. I do get a little bit more interested in the NBA high usage guy, probably going to want to go score as many points as he can narrative, because it's completely within his control, especially being pretty confident that LeBron's not going to grab him and say like, hey, don't do that. If anything, I think LeBron's going to encourage it. So with you there. Einsteinium said, does Jabari cut into Şengün's production? What happens to his rebound percentage with him and Thompson playing? Shouldn't cut into his production too much. I think that you'll see Jabari mostly kicking Steven Adams out of the rotation, playing backup center minutes. So you'll be getting a lot of minutes where Şengün's off the floor and Smith is on. They will overlap some. It's a good question about Thompson and Jabari. With both of them on the floor this year, Şengün's been out there for 333 minutes. He has a 15.6% rebounding percentage in those minutes. Thompson has a 12.7% rebounding percentage. Jabari has a 10.5% rebounding percentage. Overall this season, Şengün's rebounding percentage is 18.1%. So you do see it come down, but he still is the leading rebounder. He's still going to get his. To your point, the minutes that those guys are all on the floor together, Şengün's rebounding will take a little bit of a hit, but you're also going to see the rotation work in a way where they're not all together all the time or anything like that. Do I think Javonte Green is important at all today? No. I don't have him in for any minutes at the moment. Luka stuff, yeah. I think Horford sits. Yeah, I mean, I think he sits too, but I'd be a lot. I probably would guess he's like, I would consider projecting him out if this were like a 10 o'clock game, but with it being a 7 o'clock game, I just don't care. So yeah, Houston, I think kind of the same page as like Cleveland, where it's a bunch of good players. None of them are at a price point where you look at it and just say like, oh wow, I really need a lot of him, but they all look good. Luka did buy a house. He wasn't about to buy a house. He just bought like a $15 million house in Dallas like the week or month before he got traded. Phoenix taking on Memphis. Nothing noteworthy on the injury report for the Suns. No Jalen Bridges, no Cody Martin, Monty Morris questionable. None of that stuff matters. We do have Bradley Beal. He's been starting the last couple of games with Tyus Jones moving to the bench. I fully expect that to continue. You've been getting huge playing time from all of Beal, Durant, Booker. I am not yet just projecting Beal to play 40 minutes a night. I don't like, that's not sustainable. Maybe they try it because that's like the only chance they have of being a competent team is just running Durant, Booker, Beal into the ground. But also we'll be talking about Beal being sidelined in about a week if they do keep trying this. So I have a 36-minute projection on Beal. I have 36.5 on Durant and Booker. There is, obviously some blowout risk in any game. So I'm not going the full like 38, 39 that you are live to get from these guys. But they're all getting a decent amount of ownership. I think that it's warranted. You are getting high ceilings. You have reasonable enough pricing. 6,400 on Beal, 8,900 on Durant, 9K on Booker. Obviously, they cut into each other's production, but they are also likely to play huge minutes as long as this game is competitive. Memphis plays at a fast pace, so that benefits them, even though Memphis is solid defensively as well. So they all look good. Royce O'Neal as a value option, playing upper 20s in minutes as a starter at 4,800 looks fine. 4,900 for Nick Richards, I think, is another quality value option at center. He hasn't consistently been closing games, but we have seen it sort of. He played 28 minutes 2 games ago. He closed 4 games ago. He played 28 minutes without closing. 3 games ago, he played 9 minutes and I don't know if he got hurt or ejected. I don't remember. And then last game, he only played like 20. He didn't play at all in the fourth quarter. So you do have very volatile minutes. But again, volatility on cheap players at modest ownership is generally appealing, especially when they're good point per minute guys like Nick Richards is. So at 4,900, I don't have any issue with that. Grayson Allen at 5K, I think is just an okay dart throw off the bench. On average, he's playing 24 minutes, but if he's knocking down shots, like there's nothing stopping him from closing over Royce O'Neal or closing over Tyus Jones being in the closing lineup. Not that Jones usually closes, but you assume the closing lineup here is Beal, Durant, Booker, and then 2 of O'Neal, Richards, Allen, or like some random guy playing well. I don't even know who that would be. Memphis on the other side, we have seen increased minutes over the last basically month and a half since the new year for Ja Morant, for Desmond Bane, for Jaren Jackson, mostly obviously for Bane and Morant since they'd been somewhat limited. So they do start to look better in tournaments. The price tags are still pretty inexpensive, 7,100 to Bane, 8,100 to Morant. Reminder that this is not my player exposure. This is an optimal percentage. So again, seeing a gap like on today's specific show, seeing a gap like this between ownership and this column doesn't mean that I'm underweight or that I don't think they're a good player or anything like that. On other shows, it would mean at the very least that I'm underweight. But keep that in mind just because I didn't actually make lineups that I'd be playing. Vince Williams is looking extremely popular. He looks like a very good point per dollar value. The thing that's really going to drive up his ownership and also drive up his optimal percentage is, you can see here, he's only projected for 19 DraftKings points, but you have shooting guard and small forward eligibility. So you have the ability to use him at the maximum number of roster spots. You have the lowest opportunity cost possible at those positions. And so it just creates a situation where even if you say, Biyombo or Keta or whoever, not that Keta even projects better, but let's say you thought Keta projects let's say Keta is going to score 22, 23 DraftKings points, and then you have a 19 fantasy point projection on Williams, you would still be playing Williams a lot, and you'd be playing a lot of lineups that don't have Keta because there'd be a lot of situations where you're willing to sacrifice 4 or 5 points from Williams versus a center to get access to 2 good centers as opposed to a value center. So it's just the positional eligibility on Williams is going to drive him up. We have seen him pretty consistently playing like 18 to 20 minutes now. He's not on any sort of minutes restriction. He is an actual part of Memphis's rotation. We can pretty comfortably say he's ahead of GG Jackson based on what we've seen. Jackson only playing like 4 minutes last game. But even before that, we'd seen Jackson's minutes trend down, and Vince Williams, pretty consistently be in this playing range. Santi Aldama still only 5,100. His playing time lately, I think, has been running a little bit hot. We saw him close last game, play 29 minutes. There are going to be some games where he only plays 21, 22, but on average, you can expect him to play 24 and a half, 25, 25 and a half minutes, somewhere in that range. And at 5,100 on this slate, that's just going to make him look pretty good. So I do think that there is a lot to like here from Memphis. Vince Williams for value, Aldama for value, Morant, Jackson, Bane, all for very, very high ceilings. Zach Edey, 4,500. Right now, projected for ownership, which is a little surprising to me. He did play 24 and a half minutes last game. I will be paying close attention to see if that is going to become the norm, because if it does, I want to start rostering him as quickly as I can. But I didn't project it that way tonight. Overall, in the games where Aldama, Jackson, Morant, Bane have all been in, he's averaging about 19 minutes per game. I have him at 20 and a half, so I already have a little bit of wiggle room there. He looks fine. Like, he's still another solid point per dollar value, but same caveats for him as all of these 5K centers that we've talked about. GG Jackson is just showing up again, 3,400. It's, a large field, dart throw, hope to get lucky type play. Nothing that is particularly interesting, and it'll go away as other value opens up. Charlotte is a spot where we're going to need more information, and we're probably not going to have it until after these other 5 games start. I have no idea who is starting in place of LaMelo. Last game he was out. The last couple of games he's been out, we've gotten Elfrid Payton starting. Last game Payton started, but Damian Ball played most of the minutes. They didn't overlap at all. They really haven't for most of this year. They did overlap a little bit for garbage time yesterday, but I expect 48 minutes from them. It's just a matter of who is getting them. So the way that I am thinking about this in my head is that if Elfrid Payton starts, which is what I have projected right now, I'm projecting 24 minutes apiece. I think they both are live to play 16 minutes. I think they both are live to play 30 minutes. I think it's really just going to depend on who's playing well, how the game is going, not even necessarily which of them is playing well. It could also be what unit is playing well. Like if Elf is just playing normal and the starters are getting shit on, and then Ball is playing normal and the second unit's playing well, Ball is just going to get more minutes most likely. So there's a ton of volatility no matter what. I think there's a little bit less volatility if Ball starts, because that would at least be an indication like we're happy with how this guy's been playing. He played 26 minutes off the bench yesterday, even in a game where LaMelo was playing. Granted, a lot of that was garbage time, but he, was actually in the rotation. If Ball starts, I think it's more of an indication of we like how he's been playing. We're going to give him a look. We want to see what he can do. And he'll probably have a little bit longer leash than if Peyton starts. All that's telling you is Peyton is stepping on the floor first. It's not telling you anything else because they have no reason to care at all about Elfrid Payton. There is no chance they're finding a diamond in the rough with Elfrid Payton. Elfrid Payton probably will not be on this team in 5 days. So I do think if Ball starts, he probably has a little bit longer leash. And I would end up going to a projection of probably something like 28 minutes for Ball, 20 for Payton, instead of the 24 piece that I will most likely go to if they both start. Miles Bridges, if he's going to be low owned, I think is interesting at 8,200. I talked about it the other day, and obviously it came through. He scored 70 whatever fantasy points in 30% of my lineups, and it didn't matter because I had so much elf with him. But in these games where LaMelo is out, and obviously Brandon Miller is out, Miles Bridges is going to be risky because the Hornets suck, and they suck even more without LaMelo. But the ceiling is massive because he's not priced for LaMelo to truly be out. He can take on more of a playmaking role. He obviously takes on more of a scoring role. His playing time increases. He averages like 34 minutes per game without LaMelo. So he's in this situation where, I have him projected for 33 minutes because the Hornets are 17-point dogs. If this game actually is competitive, he's probably playing 36, 37, something like that, and probably producing really, really well if this game is competitive. So when he's not owned at all, the upside is really, really high. The floor obviously is really low as well. Elf, again, just talked about him and Ball. Seth Curry at 3,300. I do think there's a decent chance Curry plays a little bit more than usual. I still only gave him like 18 and a half minutes, but the Hornets are really weird here where they have active bodies, especially assuming KJ Simpson is active today. They have active bodies. They don't have active 2, 3s, and 4s. They have active point guards and they have active centers. They have Mark Williams, Diabate, Nurkic, and Taj Gibson as 4 of their active players. And then they have Damian Ball, Elfrid Payton, KJ Simpson as another 3 of their active players. So when you talk about the guys that play 2 through 4, typically you have, Curry, Green, Nick Smith, no more. Like that's it. Because you don't have DeQuan Jeffries. You also don't have Salon, who has been in typically in these situations. So there is some chance that Curry just plays more than we're expecting. Again, I projected 18 and a half because to TTID's point, Charlotte could want to give some of their young guys looks. Like, yeah, but also the position they're somewhat limited in that. There is a good chance that Charlotte doesn't care about, like, they'll be willing to play Ball and Simpson next to each other. Who cares? They're not going to like start playing Diabate at the 3. I don't think. Maybe they'll play Diabate some at the 4. They have done that a little bit lately. This isn't really the matchup that I would expect it though, but there's only so much they can do for that, right? Like you need guys to soak up some of these other minutes. So there is potential for Curry to actually end up playing more than people think, more than people expect. I expect Nick Smith to play a pretty good amount as well. He is 5,200, should be the secondary scorer on this team, 3rd tertiary scorer, if you want to count like Nurkic, Mark Williams as the secondary guy behind Bridges. But there should be opportunities available for Nick Smith. The center position, I think, is an absolute mess. I went 25 minutes on Mark Williams. I don't know. I just can't really bring myself to go much higher because, one, you obviously have tons of blowout risk, but you also just have rotation risk where Nurkic clearly isn't very limited anymore. He played 26 minutes last game. We don't know what that's going to mean for his timeshare with Mark Williams. In the last game that Williams was in, you didn't get a true 3-center rotation, but you did get first half rotation minutes from Diabate. We saw earlier in the year how ugly this rotation was when it was Williams, Richards, and Diabate. There's some chance they go more that direction. So it's really tough for me to get to Mark Williams at 8K. I'd be a little bit more interested in taking some shots at 5K, Yusuf Nurkic, and just hoping that, somehow he finds 21, 22 minutes and just plays really, really well. But mostly I think I'll be staying away from the centers on Charlotte. On the Golden State side, and we are now into teams that I have not fully adjusted my projections, but Podziemski, likely getting low 30s in minutes. 5,900 still looks very good here as a mid-range value in a good spot against Charlotte. Moody at 4,900 looks fine. I don't mind Buddy Hield at 4,200, probably playing low 20s, but if he plays well, could get a little bit more. Draymond, Curry, no issues with those guys. 7,800 for Jimmy Butler is fine. Steph so far is getting up more 3-point attempts in the games he's played with Butler as well, even accounting for the fact that his playing time's been up. He's averaging like 13 and a half threes per 36 minutes in the games he's played with Jimmy Butler. In the games he had played with Andrew Wiggins, he was averaging, I think, like 11 and a half-ish threes per 36. So that's something interesting to keep an eye on. Obviously, makes Steph look a little bit better the more threes that he is shooting. But in general, Golden State going to look good. I think Podziemski probably the best play from the Warriors. And then wrapping things up here in the Dallas game, Najee Marshall, 4,800. Klay Thompson, 5,400, both looking like pretty solid mid-range values, playing mid-20s in minutes. PJ Washington at 7,400, questionable, but if he is in, should be playing mid-30s and look pretty good as well. Don't mind some Dante Exum, but obviously you're expecting the minutes to be capped. Max Christie, 5,100, should play enough minutes to be a pretty solid value there. Kyrie, 9,200, if you can get there, makes sense. Pairing Kyrie with like Luka would be pretty interesting just from a correlation standpoint, but obviously that is allocating quite a bit of salary on a slate that doesn't have a lot of good value. On the other side, Luka clearly a big priority tonight. This ownership is very clearly wrong, but $10,500 is cheap no matter who he's playing. Like I said before, talked about it already, but if you're going to ever buy into a narrative, this is about as good as it gets. It's not quite Kobe retirement, but it's pretty damn close, I think. So I love Luka tonight. Goes without saying. The only real consideration is what is going to be a massive ownership gap I would expect between him and Giannis. LeBron at 10K looks fine. You know, on the one hand, you probably, like if you're really buying into the Luka narrative, you do assume that's going to cut down on LeBron's usage, but LeBron also just gets it done in so many ways that he's still fine if you really buy into the narrative. And if you're just kind of mildly buying into it, I wouldn't really worry about LeBron at all. Other than that, I don't think there's much that stands out from the Lakers. Finney Smith at 3,900 is another sub 4K forward that you can just kind of throw darts at and, you know, hope that he plays well. Should give you around 26 minutes or so. Rui probably playing low 30s, but again, just no real usage available for him when you have Luka and LeBron active. Steinium said, in the flagship and low stakes, how high do you think his ownership gets? Higher than is projected, probably. I don't know what. So in the run that I had done before the show, he was projected for like 34%. I would guess it's actually like 40, 45, somewhere in there. Yeah, like it's going to be high, but it also should be. Like, and like maybe I'm even selling it low. I don't know, but I feel like 40, 45, somewhere in there. Maybe it does get higher, but like it should be high. Obviously, I think the answer is it's going to be higher than it quote unquote should be, but it's going to be. But he's just a good enough play that he's not going to be a bad play. Like I don't think it's going to get to 70, 80%, anything like that. That would be the point where I start saying like, okay, I'm not playing Luka. Even if you told me he's 60, I don't know that I play 60%, but like I'm playing a lot because he's still just obviously one of the best plays on the slate. He'll be clearly the most popular pay up guy. I don't necessarily know if he'll be the highest owned guy on the slate just because I don't know what kind of cheap stuff will open up, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's just the highest owned guy in general. And the other thing to keep in mind too, like, and it's why stars and scrubs is a good approach in general for tournaments. Whenever we talk about value, we're talking about cheap guys. The most underpriced guys on slates are, from a point per dollar standpoint, are very often it's your cheapest guys, like your cheap guys that are stepping into big roles, and then your best players, your most expensive guys. And Luka at 10.5, like he's going to project as one of the best point per dollar values on the slate. So whatever the number is, it's probably going to be a little bit higher than quote unquote optimal, but very clearly should be the highest or one of the highest owned guys on the slate. So that's all I have for this one. There are still, like I said, plenty of injury pieces that we are waiting on. So it should be an interesting slate. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget you can get access to my projections that update as I do them using the link in the description below. That does come with a 3-day free trial. Also, sign up for Endgame Syndicate. We have a lot of good evergreen strategy, game theory type stuff up over there from Utica, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself. Other than that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for checking out the show, and I'll be back again tomorrow.